Welcome to the Peach Teach English podcast. My name is Frankie Mesmer, and I am your host. For today's episode, I recommend that you watch the video on my Substack, as there is a demonstration that will enhance the conversation. Thank you for joining this event today. No more phrasal verb headaches. My name is Frankie Mesmer. I am from the United States, but now I live in Colombia, and I've been an English teacher for 7 years. And today, Ugowhite is my co-host. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Of course, thank you. Hello, good evening. I am Blessing. Of course, you can call me Ugowhite. I'm from Africa. I live in Lagos State. I have been a coach for over 6 years now. And I'm so delighted meeting Frankie, and together we're doing this.
So today we're going to focus on the topic of phrasal verbs. So first, Ugowhite, could you define a phrasal verb for us? What is a phrasal verb?
The simple term phrasal verb is a combination of a verb and a preposition together to convert different meaning from the original verb.
So could you give us an example?
Yes, of course. For example, take off. An airplane can take off, or if I say take off my clothes, taking off from a particular place that I am presently, I will not take off in a jiffy. So its meaning is basically different from the original.
Right, you use the example take off. So a normal verb would just be take. It exists in its
Take.
purest form, take. And then we can make a phrasal verb by adding a preposition. So take off. And we will see today many take options: take in, take on, take up. And all of these little prepositions added to the verb take are going to change the meaning completely. This is why phrasal verbs can be very confusing for people who are learning English, right? But why are phrasal verbs important, guys? They're very important because, especially native speakers, we use them a lot. I know as an American, we love our phrasal verbs. For example, we have the verb remove. I can remove my clothes. But this sounds very formal. I'm not sure a native speaker would ever actually say that. Yeah, we would say, I'm going to take off my clothes. So this is just an example of how common it is. And if you want to sound more like a native speaker, or just understand native speakers better when we're talking, you really need to master these phrasal verbs because they're so common. And that's why I decided to put on this event today with Ugowhite, because a lot of students complain about phrasal verbs and how complicated they are. So the goal today is to give you guys some great tips and strategies, resources, and you leave here today more confident about studying, using, and learning phrasal verbs. So the next section we're going to talk about here, guys, is why are phrasal verbs so difficult? Why do English learners have so many problems with them? Ugowhite, could you give us an example? Why are they so hard?
To me, why phrasal verb is quite hard is it's unpredictable. Yes. I might say something, you can predict what it is. So basically, phrasal verb is kind of unpredictable because it passes or convert different meaning from its original meaning. For example, take off. So you might think I'm referring to removing my clothes, right? And you just focus all your attention there because take off to remove something. But to me, the message I'm trying to pass on to someone, I'll be taking off in few minutes, or the plane will be taking off in few minutes, right? So it has different meaning, like kind of unpredictable. You can't predict what the speaker or the person is trying to pass on.
Ugowhite, I think some phrasal verbs are very logical. For example, like put on, right? I put on my shirt. I put it on my body. This is something we can visualize very easily. And I think those types of phrasal verbs are actually easier to remember because they make logical sense. But when they don't make logical sense, it can be much more difficult to remember what they mean. Maybe in the context you read it and it's still very confusing. So an example of that, I think take off is good, right? So when we think of take off, I'm going to take off my clothes. That's very logical, right? You're taking it off your body. It's a logical explanation. But if we're referring to like my English skills are really starting to take off since I started taking English classes every week, maybe that takeoff is not so logical and you're like, what does it mean? You know? But using that context, what we're saying is my English skills are taking off. It means they're starting to improve very rapidly. Just like an airplane, right? When the airplane takes off, it goes in the air really rapidly. And so I think creating these visuals can make those complicated phrasal verbs a bit easier. Phrasal verbs are confusing because they don't make logical sense sometimes. They're confusing because they can have multiple definitions. The other thing that makes phrasal verbs very confusing is the fact that they can be separable or inseparable. And so not only is it understanding what they mean, but it's being able to identify them when you're listening, when they're separated in the sentence. Also, when you go to speak, do I separate this verb? Do I keep it together? These are complicated things that as native speakers we do naturally, but as someone learning the language, it can make their heads go very, very crazy. So it can be good to have some strategies and tips to help with that. Before we move on to the next section, though, I do want to open the discussion to everyone here. Does anybody here want to explain why phrasal verbs are difficult for you? Shahir raised his hand.
So, excuse me, friend. So, for that, take off plane means to leave immediately, to depart immediately, right, from the airport. Like, for
Mhm.
example, like Etihad Airlines, Etihad Airways has departure take off from Abu Dhabi to Paris. It's the second airline of Abu Dhabi. They have take off from Abu Dhabi. They're going to other countries like Rome, Paris, or Madrid,
Mhm.
Amsterdam.
Mhm. Exactly. Like we could say the airplane will take off at 5 o'clock, right? That's the time it's going to depart, the time it's leaving. Mhm.
Yeah, it could be anything like Etihad or Emirates. Also, I wrote it right now. Like Emirates Airlines has take off from Dubai to Madrid. It's just an example.
Exactly. That's a very good example, Shahir. Do you find phrasal verbs complicated or do you think they're easy?
Little bit, but and then later on I learn time to time. So I listen, then I understand it. Later on, I get the concept of it. Then I make my own sentence.
Think back to when you first started learning phrasal verbs, what was difficult about them?
Long time ago, I did not understand when I was in school, like about the meaning of it. There were non-native teachers. Then after I finished high school, during the COVID, I started to learn again and again. So it took some time to practice again, and as well as on YouTube channel.
Okay, so the difficulty was just really understanding the definitions of all the phrasal verbs because there's a lot. I will not explain all the phrasal verbs in our meeting today because there are way too many.
Like for example, take off. I'm gonna take off my hoodie because I'm feeling so hot now, sweating. Hoodies
Mhm.
like this one.
Yes, exactly. That's another use of takeoff. Very good, Shahir. Does anybody else want to explain to us why they think phrasal verbs are complicated? Go ahead, Juan.
Thank you. You guys are making it look so easy, and I appreciate it because I find them very difficult to use. I think that in English, there are hundreds of phrasal verbs that make some students like me very nervous. But now, after listening to this session, I think they're not that bad. You think that they use verbs that are followed by particles. I think depending on the particles that follow the verb, the meaning change. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hannah. I'm glad you found this useful. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next section, Ugowhite, which is we're going to give them some tips. How can we make phrasal verbs easier for them? So go ahead, Ugowhite.
All right, there are so many ways to learn and improve your phrase verb, right? You can listen to podcasts, watch TV, and of course, read more articles and all that. You told one story about spider, right? And you make use of one phrasal verb, pick up the spider from the wall, right? And I was able to grab it because I listened to you. And by listening to you, I am now able to pick that word, or I was able to pick that word from you. So to me, in order for one to learn more phrasal verb and master how to use phrasal verb, you need to listen more attentively, at least for you to hear every word that the speaker is making use of, and then watch more of TV. The more you listen, the more you pick the phrasal verb, and of course, start practicing it because practice makes perfect. Okay. So as you listen, make sure you write them down. You might not remember every single of them, but writing them down will make you to remember them, to go back to them for future reference, okay? To go back to them and see the ones you have heard and start practicing how to use them. Because if you didn't put them down, of course, you would definitely forget the words and the meaning of the word. So reading and watching, listening to podcasts and the rest of them would make one to improve his or her phrasal verb and master how to use all the phrasal verb the person has learned during the course of listening or watching something.
Yes, and when we get to the section about resources, maybe you can share some specific reading materials or video series that you recommend for them to use. But of course, like actively paying attention to the phrasal verbs. When you are reading an article, for example, listening to music, watching movies, you need to pay attention to when they're using those phrasal verbs, right? And I think this is really nice when reading because I think you're visualizing it in the words and you can even circle them, underline them. And guys, go deeper. If you want to really improve your English, you have to ask questions. You have to be curious. You can't be a know-it-all. If you're a know-it-all, you're not going to grow. You have to go, what can I know more? What can I know better? Yeah. And do that with the phrasal verbs. Because as we mentioned, they can have multiple meanings. Yeah. One phrasal verb could have 3, 6 different meanings. And so if you go deeper and look them up, then you can look at them in different contexts and really get the big picture of what each phrasal verb means. Okay. My number one tip here, and this is because it's so good for your memory, right? Is when we connect it to something physical or something emotional, okay? So try to create visual images with these phrasal verbs. In my video, you could see I was taking off a hat, I was putting on a hat. With these visuals, you'll be able to remember what these words mean more. Now, as we mentioned, some phrasal verbs do not make as much logical sense. And those might be harder to create a visual for, but it's not impossible. And I still think it's helpful to try to make that visual. Like, try to understand why some native speaker decided to make this word mean this crazy thing. And I really think that could help you learn some phrasal verbs. Ugowhite, do you have another phrasal verb tip?
The only thing I know that it has worked for me is to keep practicing, keep listening, and of course, write my words down. The new ones I've learned, write them down in order for me not to forget them, which will make me look back to them whenever I feel like going through them and start making use of them. For one to really, really get it, you need to use it often. If I write them down without using them often, I will definitely forget them. The more often you make use of the word, the more you get used to using them, it will definitely become part of your daily life. Sometimes, let me say this because I seem to have forgotten. Sometimes people say the way it has been used, like take off. Some other persons might say take up. I've heard a lot of people saying, how do I use the both words at the same time? They're having a hard time using the two words, the verb and the preposition together at the same time.
The learning process is not just putting the information in your head, it's also producing it, right? I think another great tip to help you guys, just like a study strategy, it's called grouping. And I would recommend two ways of grouping. The first one is you can group it by the verb. For example, take phrasal verbs, put phrasal verbs, and study them together and really master the phrasal verbs with take. The other way to group is you can group it by category. Okay, you could choose phrasal verbs related to food and cooking or clothes, right? As we were talking about, put on, take off. There's lots of other phrasal verbs related to clothes, so you can learn them together as a category. Then you're able to connect those dots and lines more easily when we're grouping them together. Okay, so I think there are a lot of tips out there, so I don't want to give you guys too many, but our big tips here for you is create mental pictures, pay attention to them in context and use them, and try grouping.
In other words, are you saying that in terms of learning, like the learning stage, one should just, for example, if you want to learn all about take phrasal verb, just focus on learning all the take phrasal verb. Once you have learned and mastered all of them, you can now move on to the other one, because mixing them up will make you not really remember everything you have learned so far.
I think it makes it more manageable. You don't have to perfectly master all the take phrasal verbs, but definitely focus on something. When we see all the phrasal verbs on a list, it can feel very overwhelming. Like, how am I going to learn all of this? Yeah. So when we start putting it in groups, it goes, okay, this week I'm going to learn take phrasal verbs. Next week, I'm going to learn put phrasal verbs. And it gives you like an organization and it feels possible. The next section, we're going to share some resources with you. And actually, I made a resource about take phrasal verbs, and we're going to look at that together. But before we do that, Ugowhite, do you have any resources that you would recommend to these guys?
Yeah, the first one is the one you sent, the one you made a few days ago, because I went through it and I saw it's really a good one. So for them to learn and master how to use take or phrasal verb, they should go back and read through all the materials, everything you have written down there. It is so quite really so rich. Okay.
Thank you.
And
Thank
of course there is this one. It is so great. I'll be so down. Now there is an English club where they can also do some phrasal verb exercise. English club. All right. We have a lot of phrasal verb exercise there for one to master his or her phrasal verb. We can just make use of the resource and get used to some of the phrasal verb there. I also have Grammar Bank phrasal verb website where you can get some of these phrasal verb used. All right. So that's the few ones I have here. They're just website that you can get a lot there and practice on how to use them more effectively.
Englishclub.com, is that the website?
Yes, it is a website, englishclub.com. And the
Yes.
second one is Grammar Bank.
Grammar
Grammar
Bank?
Bank.
Grammarbank.com.
Yeah, just as I said, one you created is very perfect for someone that wishes to improve his or her phrasal verb. It's so handy, of course.
Yes, I think I will make more of these because I think they're very helpful for students who are trying to master phrasal verbs. Another resource that's really good, and actually one of my colleagues showed it to me maybe like 2 months ago, but I really like it. Okay, guys, it's called Uglish.com. For example, guys, we could look up a phrasal verb. Let's look up put up with. Okay. Which put up with, guys, means if somebody is annoying you or if some kind of behavior is annoying, you put up with that behavior. Okay. It's not that you like it, but you put up with it, okay? You're dealing with this situation. So we're going to search put up with here. And basically, you see here, it found for us almost 4,000 videos that are going to use put up with, okay? And so basically, you get to see these phrasal verbs used in real life English situations, okay? And if you want, you could go back a few seconds just to get the bigger context. Okay, so here we go.
Who have a lot more freedom than I do. And we can't spend the night at each other's houses. At least now we can't. We're limited in what we can do. And you're probably gonna get bored. You're probably gonna bail just like other guys have. And because you won't be able to put up with the limitations that I have.
So you see, you're not going to be able to put up with the limitations that I have, okay? So we're able to see this phrasal verb used in its natural context. And then you could click and watch another one.
I mean, yeah, put up with a lot over the
See, I put up with a lot. And if we wanted to get more context,
really at the time. He didn't really get a lot of time off. Luckily, at the company that he worked for at the time, they always made sure that their boats were tied up for Christmas, which was really, really good because for family, I mean, yeah, put up with a lot over the time.
So they had to put up with a lot over time. And the cool thing, guys, you can see here is you hear an American accent, a British accent. You're going to hear a variety of accents too, which is very good for your listening, okay? Uglich is also good if you want to practice pronunciation, listening. Really useful resource for you guys to practice English. I love Uglich.com. And as Ugowhite said, you should use real life English, guys. Watch those movies, read articles, a good podcast, I believe, BBC. I think it's the 6-Minute English. Yes, BBC has a lot of good options. But for someone who maybe is not as advanced yet or has limited time, you have no excuse. Everyone has 6 minutes. You can listen to a 6-minute podcast. So I think this is very good. I actually would like to recommend that you subscribe to my community here. For example, I wrote this article, No More Phrasal Verb Headache, and I'm giving you advice, tips, but I also create materials that are just more like for fun, where you can practice your English reading. So I wrote this one about Halloween. And I also have a podcast, so you can practice your listening skills regularly. Because I'm a big supporter that you need to practice your listening skills, your reading skills, your speaking skills, and your writing skills. So I'm creating content so that you don't have to think about it. You can just read the blog I write every week, listen to the podcast every week. So this is an option. Let's look at this resource that Ugowhite was mentioning. This is the demonstration, and we're going to do this together. Take phrasal verbs practice. The first thing we're going to do, can you find the 10 phrasal verbs with take? Juan, go ahead. Can you read here, please?
The office transformation, when the team decided to take down the old cubicles, Sarah was excited to take on the responsibility of managing the renovation. The first thing she decided to do was take apart the desk and chairs. After that, they took out all the outdated furniture. Once the furniture was out, Sarah's design skills really started to take off. When they finally finished, everyone stopped to admire and take in the new office layout.
Thank you, Juan. So just pronounce with me, Juan. Cubicles.
Cubicles.
Decided.
Decided.
Finished.
Finished.
Stopped.
Stop.
Good. Thank you, Juan. So guys, this paragraph has 6 phrasal verbs. Let's try to find the 6 phrasal verbs. Shahir, do you see one?
Yeah, I think it's take down.
Okay, that's one. Thank you. Let's include somebody else. Anis?
Hi.
Hi, can you find another phrasal verb?
Talk out.
Take out. That's
Um,
one. Thank you. Okay. E. Robinson.
Take off.
You're correct. Thank you, Robinson. Good job. Okay. And Laura, can you find another one?
Yes, Francis. Stay on.
Take on. Perfect. Good. And Lisette, can you find another one?
take apart.
Take apart. Good. Okay. And Samina,
Hello,
how are you?
I'm really fine. What about you?
I'm great. Thank you. So there's one more here, Samina. Can you find it?
I think taking.
Good job. So guys, this is the first strategy you can use. When you read a text, you can look for those phrasal verbs. Now, Ugowhite, there is story number 2. I will let you lead this one. This one has 4 phrasal verbs. So you can call on the students.
Okay. Sahi, can you help us with the reading?
Reading, yeah, sure. Story 2, A Family Legacy. Emma always felt that she would take after her mother, who was a talented painter. She decided to take up painting herself and went to the store to buy a canvas and paint. When she got home, she realized that she had bought the wrong materials, so she asked her mom for help. They took them back to the store, and her mom, took over the responsibility of buying their supplies. Now Emma is ready to start her new hobby. And for the phrase, I think it will be take up.
So the phrasal verb we have there is take up. Thank you so much.
Lisette?
Take after.
Okay, that's correct.
Arshad.
There's a took over. I took them back.
You got it, Arshad.
Thumbs up to you. This one can be confusing because they are split.
Yes, but you're correct, Ugowhite. This one's more confusing because it's separable, which we mentioned at the beginning, right? Phrasal verbs can also be confusing because sometimes we can separate them.
Yes.
That's why this exercise is very good, so you can see and identify the phrasal verbs and how they're functioning in the sentence. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And thank you for leading that, Ugowhite.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so guys, that would be the first activity, identifying the phrasal verbs. Here you can check your answers. You can make this kind of web diagram to learn take phrasal verbs, put phrasal verbs.
Diagram. That's
so
very
you can
necessary,
see.
yes.
Yeah. And if you want, you could even add the definitions and examples off of them. I ask you here to write the phrasal verb and the definition, but don't use a dictionary. Don't use a translator. That does not help you improve your English comprehension skills. The first thing you should do is go back to the paragraph and try to guess and understand the meaning of the phrasal verb using the context. Because really, that's your ultimate goal, to be able to hear English and understand it, read English and understand it. You're not always going to have a translator and a dictionary next to you. Now, after you guess the meaning, you can go check. You want to learn correctly. This is important. But you do not need to become dependent on translations and dictionaries, okay? And after that, guys, you can check your answers here. These are the definitions from the stories. And then I also created this, guys, because as we mentioned before, that there are many definitions for the same phrasal verb, okay? And this is probably not all of the take definitions, but it's the most common definitions of most of the take phrasal verbs. So there's the definition, an example, and I ask you to make your own example sentence. And then finally, guys, this would be conversation, because Ugowhite mentioned this before. It's not just learning the words, it's starting to use them. We need to start producing them. So you can answer this in conversation questions, writing examples, and using those production skills. Does anybody have a question for Ugowhite and me?
I have a question.
Yes, I love questions.
When I can separate and not separate phrasal verbs.
Ooh, this is a fun question. So, Juan, there are some tips and tricks, okay? The thing with languages, there's always exceptions, and sometimes it is memorization. But I can teach you the tricks and you can apply those, and then all the exceptions you can learn, okay? So let's start with the tips. So let's start with the inseparable phrasal verbs. Usually a phrasal verb is going to be inseparable in two situations. The first one, because it's 3 or more words. For example, the one I showed in Youglish, I'll type here in the chat, put up with. This phrasal verb is 3 words, and so it's going to be inseparable. And almost all phrasal verbs that are 3 words or more will be inseparable. Like I said, could be some exceptions, but in general, you can follow this rule. The other one is the phrasal verb has no object. What is an object, right? These are very grammatical terms. But an object is basically the receiver of the action. So usually when we separate a phrasal verb, we're putting the object in the middle. So if there's no object, there's no reason to separate the phrasal verb. You will never separate the phrasal verb because there's nothing to separate it with. So for example, I slept over at my friend's. This means I stayed the night. I slept in the house of my friend. I slept over at my friend's. There's no object here. So you will never separate this verb, sleep over. And those are the 2 tips to help you understand.
Okay.
And I think, Shahir, did you have a question?
Yeah. So what we have to do with this, like with these words, you have to tell the meaning, right? Without looking, right? As you mentioned, right?
You mean in the document?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yes, one of the first exercises is to read the verbs in the context and try to understand them in context, because this is teaching you how to acquire the language, which is so important for fluency, when you're able to pick up the words naturally.
First, we have to read the text to understand what is it. Like if you try to solve by yourself, and then later on you have to check whether you got it correct or not. If you don't, it's fine. It will teach you for that. More you do it, then it will be better for you, as you mentioned.
Exactly. And thank you for clarifying that, right? But this is how we improve our comprehension skills, is by practicing our comprehension. Because think about it, in your native language, when you first started reading books, you didn't translate these words. You read them in context again and again until you were able to understand them. That's an important thing to practice. Does anybody else have a question?
Teacher, according to this lesson and this excellent explanation, we would be possible to make a summary. For example, number 1, it's equivalent in Spanish is usually a single word. Sometimes it corresponds to reflexive verb in Spanish. Or number 2, it's important to learn the meaning of each phrasal verb as a unit. Sometimes it is the verb or the particular will give you a clue, but many times either the verb not particular has anything to do with its meaning. Number 3, some phrasal verbs have a synonym. That's a one word verb. In this case, the phrasal verb is usually more common or more used.
In many
I don't know.
situations, yes, we like to use the phrasal verbs. Yes, like we talked about take off versus remove, right? I do think a lot of phrasal verbs, if we're talking about Spanish here, they are going to have a translation to just a single verb in Spanish. I do recommend, maybe in the beginning it's new, you need some translation, but try to stop translating as soon as possible because it's only going to make your brain go, "Ah," because the language is different. And so a lot of times these phrasal verbs, the logical ones, is because we're referring to some type of movement that's happening. But the other ones, yeah, you do just need to study them, learn what they mean. That's one. But very good summary. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and wrap up here today. So, Ugowhite, would you like to share how they can contact you or take classes with you?
Yeah, of course. You can check me on Titi at Ugowhite, and of course my Facebook page also Ugowhite. Yes, that's the two ways you can reach out to me. And of course, you can send email to me as well. That is a Biophonics.
Thank you, Ugowhite. Just to finish up here, as I mentioned before, I do recommend that you subscribe to my Substack community. You will get my newsletter and podcast episodes. You'll hear about the next events. I am an English teacher, so if you want to do these phrasal verb exercises together to improve your speaking, we can do that. I offer group classes and one-on-one classes, so whatever you prefer. I do offer a free courtesy class, so you guys can sign up for that and we can learn about your English goals and see how we can start working together to help you improve your English. And before we say goodbye, Ugowhite, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate. And for those of you that joined us, thank you so much. Keep practicing, keep improving. That's what matters. Thank you so much.
See you guys next time. Have a good day. Bye.
Today's episode was a recording of a live event via Zoom. If you'd like to join us for the next event, be sure to subscribe to my Substack. You can find the link in the description. Until next time.